Listen in for some positivity and good times. The views and opinions of our guests may not necessarily reflect those of the host or the Vibes Broadcast Network. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Listen to the Vibes, and I have here Mr. Terry Tucker. We're going to get to know him today and talk about his book. And before we get into the conversation, let's learn about you, sir.
Well, thank you, Kyle. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm looking forward to talking to you today. I'll give you the Reader's Digest version of me. So I was born and raised in Chicago. I'm the oldest of three boys. You cannot tell this from looking at me, but I'm 6'8" tall, and I played college basketball at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina, despite having 3 knee surgeries in high school. I have a brother who's 6'7", who was a pitcher for the University of Notre Dame, and then I have another brother who's 6'6", who was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers in the National Basketball Association. And then my dad was 6'5". So if you sat behind our family in church growing up, there wasn't a prayer's chance you were going to see anything that was going on whatsoever. So anyway, after I graduated from college, I moved home to find a job. I was actually the first person in my family to graduate from college, and I was all set to make my mark on the world with my newly obtained business administration degree. Fortunately, found that first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain. But unfortunately, I ended up living with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mom care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. In my professional career, as I said, I was a marketing executive. I was a hospital administrator, been a customer service manager. I was a police officer. And while I was a police officer, I was a undercover narcotics investigator, and I was a SWAT Team Hostage Negotiator. I was also a school security consultant, a girls' high school basketball coach, a motivational speaker. Last year, I became an author, but for the last 9 years, I've been a cancer warrior. And then finally, my wife and I have been married for 28 years, and our only child, a daughter, is a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is a lieutenant in the newly created branch of the military, the Space Force.
That is absolutely awesome. I would love to talk to her too.
Well, it's funny. We talk to her all the time, but she can't tell us anything. It's all top secret stuff. So it's,
So you were in Houston at one time, right?
That's correct.
So where were you at in Houston?
We lived pretty close to, I guess the easiest way to describe it was the medical center,
Downtown.
Where MD Anderson was, and Methodist and all the hospitals and stuff like that. We lived in that area.
Okay. And you were a coach there?
I was a high school girls basketball coach.
Ah, okay. Can I ask what high school?
Emory, Emery.
Okay. See, I'm from Baytown, so.
Oh,
right
okay,
outside
sure.
of Houston. I'm always curious when somebody says they've been in Texas. I live outside of Austin now.
Yeah, we like Texas. We certainly liked Houston. It was always a place. My wife and I are both from the Midwest, so during the winter, everybody came down to see us, and wanted to be near the beach and all that.
Oh, I got you. Yeah, that's one thing you can say about Texas. It doesn't get as cold as it does up there in Chicago.
It sure doesn't. I'll tell you. I mean, but the humidity, I'll tell you, I went to college in South Carolina, and it was the same kind of thing. You sort of sweated in the shower during certain months.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about like your time in the police force?
Sure. So I was, it's funny because if you sort of look at my progression in my career, my first 2 jobs were in business. And
Right.
That was really because of my father. My grandfather, his dad, was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954. So he was in Chicago during Prohibition, during the Great Depression, during the gangs, Al Capone and all those shooting up the town and stuff like that. And he was actually shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It was not a serious injury. He was shot in the ankle, taking a homicide suspect back to the lockup. But my dad always remembered the stories my grandmother told about the knock on the door of, Mrs. Tucker, please grab your son. Your husband's been shot. Come with us. So he wanted nothing to do with me wanting to be in law enforcement. So, he had my whole life planned out. You're going to go to college. You're going to major in business. You're going to get a job. You're going to get married, have 2.4 kids, live in a house. He had it all planned out. But that was what he wanted me to do. So my passion was to be in law enforcement. And so I waited until he passed away. And then I started down that road. And I was a 37-year-old rookie police officer, which by a lot of accounts is old. I took a lot of extra Tylenol during the police academy. I can tell you that much, going through all that. But it was a blast. I loved the job. I loved the people I worked with. I felt like I was making a difference. And, I got to work undercover narcotics and work with the FBI and the DEA. I was a SWAT Team Hostage Negotiator. That was a very intense job, but one that I loved as well. So that was when, at that point in my life, that was what I felt my passion was. That was what I felt that God had put me on this earth to do. And I felt fortunate enough to be able to do it, to live that purpose for which I was put here. So it was a great time for me. And I was sad. My wife is the primary breadwinner. So when she lost her job in Cincinnati and we had to move to Houston, I had to give that up. But I sort of stayed in it by opening up a school security consulting business.
Well, I have the utmost respect for anybody that's been in law enforcement and still in law enforcement, especially with the climate as it is right now. I don't believe that the majority of America dislikes the police. And it's shame that they're kind of painted in a bad light, but kudos to you, man. Thank you for your service.
You're welcome. And I agree with you. I always tell people, it's like, can you imagine if you went to work every day and you made less money than a plumber, nobody wanted you there, and everybody lied to you? And people kind of look at you, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, that's what a police officer does. They make less money than a plumber. Whenever they're there, nobody wants them there. It's never good when the police are involved in anything. And then, you get to a point where everybody's lying to you. Everybody wants you to believe their story, so you'll take the other person to jail. So imagine if that was your job every single day, and people are like, well, I wouldn't want to do that. No, you wouldn't. So the people who do that job do it because they want to make a difference, because it's a calling for them. They want to make their community safer. So they just happen to be the frontline branch of the government, and they get all the hassle for it.
Exactly. So you got any good stories to tell about the Citadel?
None that probably wouldn't get you kicked off the air. The Citadel was, I went to the Citadel on a basketball scholarship. I had 3 knee surgeries in high school. So, that alone should have precluded me, but I was also very lucky. I had Mike Krzyzewski, Coach K, the coach of Duke now, when he was at Army, sit on my couch and say, come to play for me at West Point. And I just didn't think my knee was up to it. So I ended up going to the Citadel. At the time, it was an all-male military college. It was incredibly difficult, on top of having to manage playing a Division I college basketball schedule with doing your academics. But I got to play against Michael Jordan when I was there. Wow. And the North Carolina team that won the national championship in 1982. I also got to play against the North Carolina State team that the following year in 1983, Jim Valvano and his squad won the national championship. So in one weekend, I got to play against those two teams. Kind of a funny story. My brother, the one who pitched for Notre Dame, was a basketball coach in Chicago at Loyola Academy, and he coached both of Michael Jordan's 2 sons. And he was at practice one day, and he said, I'm trying to teach the players a play. And I look up and nobody's paying attention to me at all. So I look over to the door where they're all looking, and Jordan had come into the gym, but he was there as a parent to pick his kids up after practice. It wasn't any, basketball related thing. So my brother looked at him and said, hey, Michael, would you mind stepping out? You're a little bit of a distraction. And Jordan and his wife were just great parents. They didn't interfere. They didn't try to, helicopter parent and be the coach. And so Jordan was like, sure, coach, I'm sorry. I'll step outside till after practice. And my brother thought later, he said, I'm probably the only coach in the history of basketball that ever kicked Michael Jordan out of practice,
How funny.
Yeah, I have as I mentioned, our daughter, she got my height. So she's 6'2" and was actually recruited to play basketball at the Air Force Academy. That's how she ended up there. Also ended up having knee surgery her freshman year, and that pretty much put her out of the game as well. But I mean, was very fortunate to get a great education. And I still will never forget the day that in May when she got her diploma, walked across the stage and shook hands with the president of the United States. You know, it's like, boy, you couldn't be much prouder of her than we were at that time.
Oh, I can only imagine. It's great being a dad, but it's saddening when your kids grow up. You know, my daughter's fixing to turn 30, and I'm like, oh, she's making me old.
Yeah, ours is 25. So, I mean, she's definitely a woman, and she's getting married in the fall and that. So it's, yeah. You're definitely feeling a little bit older, aren't you?
Right. Well, congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
Let's get into talking about your cancer. Now, how did you manage to find out that you had gotten cancer?
So in 2012, I was, as I mentioned before, the girls' high school basketball coach at Emory in Houston. And I had a callus that broke open on the bottom of my left foot, right below my third toe. And being a coach, you're on your feet a lot. So I didn't think about it. But after a couple of weeks, when it didn't heal, I went to see a podiatrist, a foot doctor, a friend of mine. And he took an x-ray and he said, Terry, I think you have a cyst in there and I can cut it out. And he did. And he showed it to me. It was just a gelatin sac with some white fat in it. And he said, you know, I've seen thousands of these, no big deal, but I'll send it off to pathology. Well, 2 weeks later, I get the call from him, and the more difficulty he was having describing what was going on to me, the more frightened I became, until he just laid it out. He said, Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years. I have never seen this form of cancer. You have a rare form of melanoma. And we all think of melanoma as a skin disease, excuse me, which it is, but there's a rarer kind, which I have, which appears on the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands. And then there's an even rarer form of melanoma that appears in your mucous membrane, so in your nose or your mouth or someplace like that. So he suggested that I be treated at MD Anderson, which, living in Houston, it was great because MD Anderson is in Houston, and I was able to go there. So I had 2 surgeries to remove the tumor on the bottom of my foot and then all the lymph nodes in my groin. And after I healed, I was put on a weekly injection of a drug called interferon to kind of help the disease from, you know, just to keep it from coming back. It wasn't a cure. It was just a kick the can down the road kind of thing. Right. But for me, interferon was just a horrible, nasty, debilitating drug. For lack of a bit, what it did is it gave me flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after each injection. And I took those weekly injections for almost 5 years. So imagine having the flu every week for 2 or 3 days for 5 years. And that's just to keep the disease at bay, not to keep it, you know, not to heal you or to keep it from coming back. So eventually the drug became so toxic to my body that I ended up in the intensive care unit with a fever of 108 degrees, which, excuse me, is usually not compatible with being alive, but I was able to be saved at that time. I stopped the drug. That was 2017, and the disease came back. 2018, I had my left foot amputated. 2019, it came back again in my shin, and I had multiple surgeries. And then last year, an undiagnosed tumor in my ankle grew large enough that it fractured my tibia, my shin bone. And further testing found that my entire lower leg was full of cancer, and I had tumors in my lungs. So last April, right in the middle of the pandemic, I had my left leg amputated above the knee. So that was pretty much my cancer journey. And on that uplifting story, we can...
Well, and I have kind of a 2-part question here for you. You are a man of faith.
I am.
And I know that when you kind of rely on God to help you, that I guess the lack of a better term is just he's the person that you lean on, and that's how you get through things. But was there ever a point where you was like, God, why are you doing this to me?
No, I've been asked that question several times, do you blame God because you got cancer? And I said, no. I said, I don't think God got up on a Tuesday morning and said, here's my to-do list, things to do. I'm going to give Terry cancer. I just don't just don't think that happened. I don't think God operates in that way. So
Right.
I never blamed him for getting it, but I certainly have gone to him on numerous occasions to help me get through it. I always talk about the things that have gotten me through this are the 3 F's, which are faith, family, and friends. So I've had a tremendous, always had a tremendous faith in God, and I certainly have needed him on numerous occasions as I've gone through this cancer journey.
Right. Well, I mean, that no better testimony than to say that, well, look the way you're living your life. You're still upbeat. And if anybody has a reason to be kind of down, it would be you, but you don't take that victim mentality.
No, I don't. And I almost, and this is going to maybe sound kind of strange, but in a lot of ways, cancer has benefited me, or let me say it another way. I've benefited from cancer, that it is taught me things. It's taught me that we're so much more than we ever thought we could be, that the our limits are the limits we put on ourselves, that everything we need to be successful in life is already inside us. We just need to find it and pull it out. So yeah, I have been very fortunate. And as I mentioned, I found out I had to have my leg amputated. I also found I had tumors in my lungs. And recently my doctor showed me a CAT scan from back in October of 2020 of my lungs. And I'd never seen it before. And I looked at him and I was like, how was I still alive? I mean, I had fluid along the pleural spaces in the lungs. I had tumors in both. I'm like, how was I alive? And he's like, I don't know. So I kind of just look at it like God's not done with me yet. And so from that perspective, being able to go on podcasts, put as much goodness, love, positivity, peace back into the world is kind of my purpose now.
Oh, and that's the whole point of the show, is to bring inspiration and motivations. There's times where you will go through so much and you think, how can I keep going? And you don't realize that somebody else has got it worse than you do. And then to see somebody like you rise above all this, if that's not an indicator that, I can do it, I can make it, then I don't know what else is.
You're absolutely right. Because and I guess I want your audience to understand that, there's no S on my chest. I don't have a cape or anything like that. I have bad days. I mean, there are days when I cry. There are days when I feel down and low and depressed and things like that. We're all going to experience pain in our lives. Pain is inevitable. And it doesn't have to be pain like mine, like cancer and things like that. I mean, you could flunk a test at school, or break up with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, or, somebody else in your office can get the assignment that you wanted. Whatever it is, we're all going to experience pain. Pain is inevitable. Suffering, on the other hand, that's optional. That's what you do with that pain. Do you use it to make you stronger, to make you tougher, to make you more determined? Or do you just sit in it and wallow in the muck and the garbage and the gunk and have people want to feel sorry for you? I just choose not to stay there. I get there, but I just choose not to stay there. I choose to use that ugliness and that pain to make me stronger. And believe me, if I could figure out how I did that, and I'd write a book about it and go live in Jamaica somewhere. But right now it's just, it's up to you how you want to deal with it. It's not up to anybody else. There's nobody to blame. These are the cards you've been dealt. You have to play them. Well,
as much as this life throws at you, I can understand getting upset. But this is the one thing I don't understand, is I got more upset if I could pay a bill than I did when I had my heart attack or when my spine started to deteriorate. I rose above that, but yet those things that I probably shouldn't have worried about, those were the things that upset me the most. I don't know why.
Yeah, our priorities, I think, sometimes get out of whack. And you're right. None of this stuff really matters. I talk about, we all want to be successful. We want to have, money and power and influence, and, we want to live in the big house and drive the fancy car. Well, at the end of your life, none of that stuff goes with you. None of that power and prestige goes with you at all. the only thing that goes with you is love. The love that you were created in, the love that you have in your heart, that I believe goes with you. There's an old story about Alexander the Great, who, probably one of the greatest conquerors of all times, probably one of the worst people in history too, because the number of people that he had put to death because of what he did. But there's a story about him dying, and it talks about how he had 3 wishes when he was dying. So he brings all his counselors and his generals and everybody together, and he says, I want you to carry out my final 3 wishes. And he said, the first one is, I want only my doctors to carry my coffin to the grave. The second one is, I want the road to the cemetery to be strewn with gold and precious stones. And the third one is I want my hands to be left outside my coffin. And one of his counselors looks at him and says, well, you're a pretty powerful and influential person. These are very strange wishes. Why do you want these particular wishes carried out? He said, number one, I want people to realize that no doctor ever cures anybody. They only assist the body in helping to cure itself. So I want my doctors to carry me to my final resting place. Secondly, he said, I want the road to be strewn with gold and silver and precious stones, because I spent my entire life conquering and acquiring riches, which none of them are coming with me to the next life. And he said, about my hands hanging out of my coffin, I want people to realize that I came into this world empty-handed, and we pretty much leave it the same way. And I think that's a really good example of, probably one of the most influential people in the history of time, who, I don't know if that story actually happened or not, but if it did, it's certainly somebody who the light bulb went on and was like, you know what, the things that I cared about in my life are not the things that are important. The things that are important are the love that we have in our hearts, and that's what we take on to the next life.
Exactly. There's nothing more enriching than the love that you have for family and friends, and of course, your relationship with God. And I wish that I could, make people understand that, but that's a journey you have to take on your own. Because there was a time in my life I wouldn't listen to anybody. I wanted to party and, run around and do all kinds of crazy things. Didn't care what God had to say. And it was that coming to God on my own. That's the only way you're going to learn. Only way.
It is, and if you think about it, if you think about a God who loved us enough to know all our dumb, stupid, crazy, sinful ways, but yet still loved us enough to put us on this world to try to make a difference, to try to make this world a better place. That's an incredibly overwhelming feeling for me. That kind of love is not something you and I probably really understand or ever will understand until hopefully the day that, we finally meet God face to face. So I just think about how you knew all the dumb things I did in my life, but still loved me enough to put me here. That says something about this person that we call God.
Well, all the things that I went through with, the drug problem, and I should have died then. And especially the drinking, because I drank like nobody's business. And then there was the heart attack, and, the attempted suicides. But it made me realize that he's got a purpose for me. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here right now. Now, I may not know what that is, but he does. And if I've accomplished that, then I know it's okay to move on. But until then, I have a job here. And so that's why I believe you are here to help motivate people too. You wrote a book. Talk a little bit, give a quick synopsis of the book.
Sure. So the book is called Sustainable Excellence, the 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. And it was really born out of 2 conversations I had. One was with a former basketball player of mine who had moved to Colorado, where my wife and I live, and we had dinner with her and her boyfriend. And I said to her one night, I said, I'm excited that you're living close and I can watch you find and live your purpose. And she got real quiet for a while, and she looked at me and she's like, well, coach, what do you think my purpose is? I said, I have no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding that purpose and living it, being open with your heart to figuring out the reason that God put you on the face of the earth. So that was one conversation. The second conversation was with a young man from college who connected with me on LinkedIn and wanted to know what I thought were the most important things he should learn to not only be successful in his job or in business, but in life. And I didn't want to give him the, get up early, work hard, help others kind of stuff. I mean, not that those aren't important. They are. Of course. I wanted to give him something that I was hoping would resonate sort of in his soul. So I thought about it for a while and I wrote some notes, and eventually I came up with these 10 principles. And so I sent them to him. And then I stepped back and I was like, I've got a life story that fits underneath this principle, or I know somebody whose life emulates this principle. And literally, I had my leg amputated in April of 2020, and I started chemotherapy for the tumors in my lungs in June of 2020. And during that 3-month period where I was healing, I sat down at the computer and I started to build stories underneath each of these principles. And that's how sustainable excellence came to be.
And the thing is too, that we don't always see the things that come from whoever we're supposed to inspire or help out. We may never ever find that out, but you're putting that in your bank account for the next life.
Yeah, you're right. It's funny you say that. I had a nurse recently who, when I first started I'm on a clinical trial drug now that pretty much beats me up when I take the medicine. And she came to me. She was actually in training when I first started, and she came to me a couple months ago and she said, I've got a story I want to tell you, but I'm a little apprehensive about telling it to you. I'll come back later. And she had to work up the nerve, and so she comes back later and she said, when I first met you, I was going to get out of nursing. I had a friend die. I was in a dark place. I talked to my mom and dad. I was going to quit nursing and go to work for Amazon. And she said, and then I met you, and I saw your, what you go through every day, and that it's not just about you, but it's something bigger than you. And I've seen everything, how you live your life. And she said, I knew when I met you that I was in the job I was supposed to be in, that I was doing what I was put on this earth to do. Now, if she would have never told me that story, I would have had no idea that my life had impacted her. And it's just like you said, we have no idea who's watching us, who wants to be, I want to be like Kyle, or I want to be like Terry, or I want to, we have no idea who those people are. There's an old saying that goes, a careful person I want to be, a little person follows me. I dare not go astray for fear they may go the same way. So I always remember that, that how you live your life, people are looking at that, and people want to be like you, whether it's a good life or a bad life. I'd prefer it to be a good life. True. So that you're leading people down the right path. I mean, you certainly had, I'm sure what you would call your bad times, and then you found God, and you preach, and you want to bring people closer to God based on the way you act and the way you conduct your life. So it's not, I'm not going to say it's okay, if you start off bad, but if you do, don't think it's hopeless. Don't think that you can't turn your life around and make a difference in your life and the lives of other people.
Whenever I was just being selfish and just, I drank and did all that crazy stuff, I didn't realize that I wasn't just hurting myself. It was my children, because I neglected them. And when I turned my life around, it seems like my kids, I guess they found inspiration. I don't want to sound egotistical, but they kind of found inspiration in that. And though I didn't finish college, my kids have gone to college. My daughter, she's in banking. I have a son that's he's an esthetician, and he's going for his chemistry degree so he can get into that part of it. And then I got another one who's in the nursing field. And I look back and I'm like, how in the world did they did they come this far with the father that they had? But I don't want to sound egotistical, but it does. I guess they found that inspiration when they seen dad could change, then they could succeed. And now I have grandchildren. They're watching Pawpaw, and Pawpaw doesn't want to slip back into that same old that I was before. They, you're right. You've got people that are watching you all the time, and I used to do a daily devotional on Instagram every morning, and it was just a few minutes, but I don't know. I just felt like, man, why am I doing this? But I did it anyway. I just kept doing it. Didn't think that it was really doing anything until I got a message one day, and somebody had thanked me that they really needed the message that I gave them that morning. I guess God, every once in a while, He says, "I'm going to reward you a little bit for your hard work. I'm going to show that you are making a difference."
Yeah, you are. And that's just it. Every now and then God slips us a little, it's kind of like the tooth fairy, a little quarter under the pillow or something like that. Just to let you know, hey, I'm still here. I'm still in charge. You're doing what I want you to do. Keep doing it.
So do you have any further plans to, maybe take this a little bit further than just the book?
I don't know. I'm toying with a second book. And one of the things that when I wrote the book is about success. And I think, success is what we do. You were a successful, minister. Maybe I was a successful policeman, things like that. And I'm not going to say I missed the mark, but I think my second book, I would like to be about another word that begins with S, and that would be significance. Because success is what we do for ourselves. Significance is what we do for other people. Now, I think you can be both. I think you can be successful and significant, but I think the second book would be more geared toward significance. So that's something that's on my plate. Again, I've got intertwined with all this is my cancer journey and I'm trying to do physical therapy to walk again. I've got these tumors in my lungs, which every third week, I have a week-long stay at the hospital for treatment, and then I'm off for 2 weeks. So it's kind of keeping the house of cards from falling down, so to speak. And I'm doing the best I can. And I'm sure God will, it's funny because I remember people saying, you should write a book, you should write a book, you should write a book. And I'm like, why should I? I'm not an author. How can I write a book? And, there's that old kind of joke that goes, when we talk to God, it's called prayer. When God talks to us, it's called schizophrenia. God never talked to me directly, right. But I think God put people in my path that said, Terry, you should write a book. Terry, you should write a book. Terry, you should. And I think I'm a smart enough individual to know that when multiple things are being said to me by different people at the same time, that maybe I ought to, perk up and take note of that and maybe at least consider doing that. So that's I always say I wrote the book, but I really think it was inspired by something much bigger than me, which was God.
So you do podcasting?
I don't have my own podcast. I am a guest on, I've probably been a guest to talk about my story on well over maybe 120 different podcasts around the world, all different kinds. I've been on, internet radio and things like that. And my wife gets mad at me because she's like, you need to take these 2 weeks and heal and rest and all that. And I'm like, I get plenty of time to rest when I'm dead. This energizes me. This makes me feel like I have a purpose. And I talked about earlier having to live at home with my mom and take care of my dad. And my dad had, when he was diagnosed, was end-stage breast cancer. They pretty much told him to go home and die. And he lived for 3.5 years. And I believe he did because he had a purpose, because he went to work up to 2 weeks before he died. And I don't want people to think that your purpose has to be your job. It doesn't. Your job could be what you do to make money, but your purpose is you're a writer, or you volunteer, or you're in the theater or playing it, whatever it is, that's what your real purpose is. So it doesn't have to be your job. For me, it was, but I just remember my dad having that purpose. And so for me now, I spend these 2 weeks that I have off doing podcasts and talking about just the same things you and I are talking about. And my wife is always like, you can only do 2 a day. You got to rest. And there are days when I'll do 5 in one day. And, that obviously does not make for good domestic tranquility in the household. So, but it's something, it's my purpose now. It's the reason I believe God has put me here, and I'll do it until he tells me not to do it, or he says it's time to come home.
Well, you should consider having your own show, because I believe that would be a further, besides the book, of being an inspiration to people, and just talking like you are right now, and the things that you've been through, the things you've seen. I mean, a lesser man would be mad and just be cursing life altogether, but yet you've taken something that's negative per se, and you've turned it into something positive. I commend you for that.
Well, thank you. I mean, and you and I both know when it's kind of the old Winston Churchill quote, when you're going through hell, keep going. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the way I feel. And it's like, there's no way I could have gone through this hell by myself. So there's got to be something bigger than us.
Or as the quote from Shawshank Redemption, get busy living or get busy dying.
That's a great quote.
Do you have social media that people can follow you?
I do. I actually have a website called Motivational Check, where I put up a daily quote for the day, something inspirational or motivational. On Mondays, I put up the Monday morning motivational message, which is usually a video or a story or something like that. But I realize people's time is at a premium. So the videos and the stories are short. If you need a quick hit of inspiration, go to motivationalcheck.com and you can find it there. I also have all my social media accounts are there: LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Also, you can get access to my book through that. And you can also get the book through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks. Pretty much anywhere you can get a book online, you can get Sustainable Excellence.
I noticed you had a blog on there and all kinds of cool stuff. So yeah, I recommend if just to uplift yourself, go check it out. Get the book. I'm thinking about getting the book myself. I kind of like to read that because I have my down days. I don't want people to think that my days are filled with rainbows, because there's a lot of times that I have to drag myself out of bed and I'm like, why am I still doing this? But you just got to stop asking that question and say, why am I not doing this?
Yeah, it's just the wrong question. I mean,
Right.
You need to control your mind, or it's going to control you. So, you can hold one thought at a time. Why would you make that a negative thought? Why wouldn't you make it something positive that would help you?
That's right. Well, Mr. Tucker, I thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we end the show?
Let me close with one story, if I might.
Sure.
I've always been a big fan of Westerns. So when I was growing up, my parents used to let me stay up and watch, Gunsmoke and Wild Wild West. So 1993, the movie Tombstone came out. You probably saw it. It's a classic, I think. It starred Val Kilmer as a guy by the name of John Doc Holliday, and Kurt Russell as a man by the name of Wyatt Earp. Now, Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp are two living, breathing human beings that walked on the face of the earth. They're not made up characters for the movie. And they called him Doc because he was a dentist by trade, but pretty much Doc Holliday was a card shark and a gunslinger. And Wyatt Earp had been a lawman his entire life. And these two men from entirely divergent backgrounds in their lives come together to form this very close relationship, this very close friendship. And at the end of the movie, Doc is dying of tuberculosis at a sanitarium in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, which is about 3 hours from my house. And the real Doc Holliday died in that sanitarium, and he's buried in the Glenwood Springs Cemetery. And Wyatt, at this point in his life, is destitute. He has no money. He has no job. He has no prospects for a job. So every day he comes to play cards with Doc, and the two men pass the time that way. And so in this scene, they're talking about what they want out of life. And Doc says, I was in love with my cousin when I was young, but she joined a convent over the affair. But she's all that I ever wanted. And he looks at Wyatt and he says, what about you, Wyatt? What do you want? And Wyatt says, I just want to lead a normal life. And Doc looks at him and says, there's no normal, there's just life, and get on with living yours. You and I probably both know people who are standing there at their life. It's like, if this happens, then I'll have a normal life. Or if that happens, then I'll be successful in life. Or if this happens, whatever it ends up being. Don't wait for your life to happen. Go out, find your life, find the purpose that God put you on this earth to do, and live it. Because I promise you, at the end of your life, you will have so much more happiness and peace if you live your life that way.
That's true. How many times have I said, if I only had this much money, or if I only had this place or this vehicle or this, that, or the other, and life would be so much better. And all I had to do was just start living my life instead of just waiting. You can't just stand by, because otherwise it's going to pass you by.
It is.
But thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kyle.
I will definitely put up the links in the descriptions. Thank you, and I appreciate everyone that watches us or listens to us. And without your support, we just wouldn't be here. And until the next one, take care.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Listen to the Vibes. You can catch us on Buzzsprout or wherever you listen to your favourite podcasts, and on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook at The Vibes Broadcast Network.